All right, we're back here on Community Focus. Glad you could join us today. Kenny Fogle here with you, and I've got Dixie Hibbs here with us as well. Dixie, former mayor of Bardstown, and current historian in Bardstown. And when I looked into history, I basically give Dixie a call first or check one of her books that she's written. And last week, Dixie, we were talking about the history of Bardstown, Salem, and all that kind of stuff. First of all, we're going to expand on that a little bit. But Bardstown was part of a bigger area. I mean, obviously Nelson County, when it come in, it was one of the first counties in a huge area.
Well, first of all, we were Bardstown, Kentucky. No, that's wrong. We were Bardstown, Virginia. I remember when we were Bardstown, Virginia from 1780 to 1792. And we were Bardstown in Jefferson County, Kentucky from 1780 to 1785.
We really must messed up the post office.
Oh, we didn't have one then. It was in 1790, so we got the post office. But, most of that hand-delivered letter or word of mouth got around a lot, too, on that. Newspapers actually were sent by people going from one place to another.
So if I asked somebody where Bardstown, Virginia was, I'd be correct. That they probably wouldn't know, but I'd be correct in saying that.
Yeah, but I think there is a Bardstown, Virginia still.
Oh, really?
I do. I have to check on that. Someone told me that, and I really didn't check it out. But, we talked earlier about the conditions here. The people coming down the river in flatboats. The earliest settlers in Kentucky came over the Cumberland Gap, mostly. But the later ones, the ones from 1779 and on later, came down the rivers. It just made more sense. And Nelson County, at the time that it became Nelson County, would take in 16 of our present counties. Now, it went from the eastern edge of Washington County all the way over to the Ohio River, taking in Hardin, Breckenridge, Meade, and all of those. And it went down, taking in part of Greensburg, Taylor County. It would take in over to almost to Owensboro. Part of Hancock County was in, and also down at Princeton. In that area, when you look on a map, it's quite a large area. When we started out with Jefferson County was one of three: Jefferson, Fayette, and Lincoln. Those were the three in the Kentucky. It was Kentucky County, and then the three: Jefferson, Fayette, and Lincoln. And then Nelson County came on.
Now, who was Lincoln named after?
Lincoln was, it wasn't Abraham.
Obviously.
No, there was a Colonel Lincoln that in Virginia, in that part. In Northern Virginia, actually, it may have been.
I guess that was, I always assumed that Lincoln County was named after Abraham Lincoln,
no.
So I learned something already.
No, he wasn't born yet.
I think it's not.
His grandfather was born, and his name was Abraham Lincoln, but it still wasn't named for that. The Lincoln name just went further back on that. And Fayette County was named for the Marquis de Lafayette.
Didn't know that either.
Yes, from the Revolutionary War.
Know much French history.
Well, it's because he came over here for us in the Revolution. See, he was very beloved here by Americans because he didn't represent France when he came on his own, so to speak. But I say that with some reservation because I know there were some soldiers that came with him, but I think they were more like the mercenaries that we talk about today. The British hired the German to come with them too.
Well, we were named after a general, right? General Thomas Nelson.
And they also call him Governor Thomas Nelson too.
But did he ever come to here, or was he never set foot here?
No, but what happened during the Revolutionary War? He was famed for having directed the Americans' the cannon fire on his own house. Oh. Because it was occupied by the British. Yeah. And I think all of us would hesitate before we would have a cannon fire on our own house. Even
his mother-in-law went in there, nothing much,
they didn't talk much about mother-in-laws back then. I have a feeling they didn't last as long as they do now. Everybody is a mother-in-law almost.
Yeah, we all have a mother-in-law story.
Well, since we were Virginia, and this is after the Revolution, and the last battle of the Revolution was fought in Kentucky. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
This is
just like a class for me. You're all watching me go to school is what you're doing.
That's right. There'll be a test later.
There will be, and I don't know how I'll do on it.
Well, in 1782, they had the Battle of Bluelux, which was the Kentucky militia against the Indians and the British. And that was the last battle of the Revolutionary War. The war had already been surrendered. I mean, Cornwallis had already surrendered in the East, but without a telegraph or telephone or any way to let us know, we were still fighting out here. Yeah. And like they did in New Orleans.
Gary hadn't started Channel 6 yet.
Not exactly. You know, they call it the wilderness telegraph. That's usually the word that got passed around from people traveling. Well, it hadn't gotten here yet. And that was the big battle up in northern Kentucky. And it was very, we lost a lot of people there. And here in Nelson County, we had a fort that was fired. They call it the Burnt Station. It was over toward northeast Nelson, not exactly at Fairfield and not in Bloomfield, but a little further over.
Yeah.
And this was a fort that had been attacked by Indians who had been at this fight. They'd been up in the battle, and they were coming back through Kentucky, going to cross the river, probably over Brandenburg area or something. And they came upon the fort. The men of the fort, many of them had gone off to fight this battle. And so the fort was under defended, and they snuck up on them and killed several men and women and children. They kidnapped several women and children. And there is the occasion that one of the women actually was rescued years later in an Indian village up in Canada and brought back down. But this was probably the worst Indian affair here that we had, was the Burnt Station. And that was, I'm going to almost call it a revenge thing that they had lost at the Battle of Bluelux. And so as they came through, they were going to steal horses and people, and they often took the women and children, not the real little children. They would take those that could grow up in the Indian villages and things. But the government, I want to talk a little bit about county government. You know, county government is a front page news all the time now, but at that point, we didn't have a county judge. We had appointed it really early on from Virginia, the appointed officials who would be in charge of things. And charge of things basically was protection, collecting taxes, and then setting up courts. Now, the court system was planned exactly like the one in Virginia. All of our laws and everything came about, and they were based on the Virginia laws. Even the fact we're a commonwealth. Virginia's a commonwealth.
Yeah, right.
Massachusetts is a commonwealth.
I did have that one right.
And Kentucky is a commonwealth. We adopted things like the stocks and pillory, which they were using, and we have a replica of that in front of the old county jail.
Right.
And they would punish people for minor crimes, I called it. If you stole a chicken, which is not too minor if you only have 2 chickens and somebody takes one, that's pretty serious. But you had the crimes that we today would think of petty theft or even not libel, but calling people names. And this was not, if you were swearing, if you swore by God twice now, you're mad, so by God this or by God that, you were fined. Now, we could take care of our tax situation now if we could enforce that.
Oh,
today.
my goodness.
Yes.
So
we could certainly.
Depending on the word, we can really make some money.
Well, the thing is, anything they consider profanity. That was considered profanity. Swearing was bad. You had the militia. I want to talk about that a minute. Today, it's a volunteer thing and you're constrained.
Right.
In the early years, we had militia companies. Now, if you can imagine Nelson County being so large, you drew the men in your company from the area that you lived in. So you had a group that was under Cox. You had another group under a New Haven or a LaRue County name kind of thing. Different areas of your county. They would raise their ranks, their soldiers, from the able-bodied men, and they would be young men and they would be older men. And they were required to basically sign up for it. If you paid your taxes, you had the name of all the people in your area, and you were contacted and had to come and serve in the militia, unless you had some physical handicap. If you had one arm, you didn't have to, or if you could not ride a horse or couldn't walk, you didn't have to. But it was considered, it was your part of the protection of the area. Now this is 1780s, and there's Indians still around. We still had situations where you were called on to go out and fight or enforce things, even to the point of helping people. If you had a flood, just like we do today, if you had a situation that they needed to call up manpower, you had the militia groups. And they would train, and they would elect their own officers. The War of 1812, Kentucky militiamen went to New Orleans. But they didn't just go to New Orleans. They went up into Canada. The War of 1812, there were more Kentuckians killed in the War of 1812 than any other state. We had more people who had volunteered to go to that war.
We have this same distinction in Vietnam too, so I don't know, we're not really good on the war part.
Well, I think we're pretty good.
We're pretty good, but
we don't always come back.
We don't always come back, that's right.
I think the patriotism and the commitment there are there.
No question about that.
They tell me that the men in the sharpshooters that Jackson depended on in the Battle of New Orleans, that most of those men learned their skills shooting or barking, they call it, barking the squirrels out of the trees. Now you bark a squirrel by shooting right next to him on the branch to where the concussion hitting the branch knocks the squirrel off or maybe kills him from the concussion. And you didn't have a hole or ledge you had to pick out of it. And you had the other varmints that the county would pay you to bring their pelts in. If a wolf or any type of a varmint that would get into things, eat your chickens and things, foxes and things, you could actually pay your taxes with pelts like that and all. But you, for a while, there were so many varmints, the state would actually pay you a bounty on each one you brought in. So this was a way for the young men, and young women too, I imagine, if they'd let them, to raise a little money, is to bring those skins in and they get paid because
I collected old Coke bottles and things.
There we go.
they did it differently.
Well, each generation has their own thing on that part. Well, Nelson County drew a lot of people here. Excuse me. In the early years, the settlers and the pioneers and all were coming. They were craftsmen. They set up mills. They brought their stills with them down the river, took the corn that they were grinding and made it into spirits. They also had the lawyers. The lawyers came pretty quickly. And they were instrumental in setting up the government and setting up the rules and regulations. We didn't have a policeman here in Bardstown until the early 1820s. But we had the sheriff's department, and his deputies would go as far as keeping the law, keeping the peace. But he was for a large area. And I'm going to speak one moment about that large area. There was a real interesting case. In our records in the courthouse annex, we have thousands of cases. And these are where people sue each other or where the sheriff has brought somebody in for a crime and things like that. Most of the information I have about Nelson County comes from those cases, and I have read thousands of them. Now, the one that I was so intrigued with, on the outside of the bundle, it's a bundle of papers all wrapped up, and it'll say what the case is about. Well, here's the case, and the charge is piracy. I'm sitting here in Nelson County thinking, piracy? How did this happen? So I have to open that case and see the rest of it. Well, it seems like in 1783, a former British soldier had hidden along the riverbanks on the Ohio River, west of us, all the way to the west, had hidden there and had induced is a good word. He was trying to get someone in the flatboat to come over and rescue him. He was saying that he had escaped from something and he had to, please come get me and all. Well, when they pulled over to the bank, he pulled out the gun and he took the boat. He robbed the people. I don't know that he killed them, but he did rob them. He took their boat and their goods. Well, they caught this man, but they didn't actually bring him to court until after Nelson County was formed. See, 83, we're not Nelson County. But it happened in Nelson County, so when they did catch him, they brought him to court in 1786. And here you have this nice case for piracy. And piracy is theft on water. You could have a case of piracy on the Simpson Reservoir, I guess,
I guess so.
But the whole thing on piracy is that you have stolen something that was on water, I guess a boat or a flatboat or whatever. But I thought that was real intriguing. It certainly made me open the case to see what kind of piracy we had. And he was found guilty and he was punished. The punishments, too, we talk about the old county jail we have. Well, it's 1820 when that jail is built. We had a log jail. 2 log jails. We had one for debt and one for crime, for criminals. The only difference was about 10 square feet. And they were both log, and they were located somewhere in what they call the Bardstown Square. We also had a corral, and we called it the stray pen, P-E-N, stray pen. Not one you lost out of your pocket, but the idea that the animals were wandering loose. Everybody didn't build fences around their animals. The pigs would go out in the woods and eat the acorns and different things. Horses got away from you, wandered off and all. Cattle got away, kind of thing. And when someone would find a stray animal out on the road, they would bring them into Bardstown and they'd put them in the stray pen.
The lost and found.
Lost and found, there you are. Now, the owners of these animals had probably already marked their ears. We didn't brand them like they do the cowboys, but they would have marks in their ears, and they would register those marks in the records. So there was no problem about, yes, this is my cow. You see this, there's 3 slits on the left ear, and you go to the record, and there it is. Well, the thing about the stray pen, when you lost something and you came to town and it had been in the pen, it might have been in the pen 4 or 5 days, maybe a week. You had to pay to get it out because somebody had been feeding that animal, see. So it wasn't a fine that your animal went away. It was the cost of putting it up till somebody came and claimed it. So a lot of the things we still do kind of like that, like your car gets towed, and it gets stored like that. That's right. So if your horse got towed, there we go on that. Any questions?
Well, no. Well, on the sheriff's issue, I know we move on into later years when Jesse James apparently came to town. I think he had one of his best friends was the sheriff. I think Donnie Pence was the guy's name. So we've got a very colorful history with our sheriffs and people that.
Well, and we had detectives here. George Hunter was a city marshal in the 1850s and 60s. He was a Civil War soldier, and he went on to become one of the most famous detectives. You've heard of Pinkertons. We didn't have Pinkertons in Kentucky. Not that we didn't need them, but we had Yankee Bly, and we had George Hunter, and we had others who made it a point of tracking down lawbreakers, those that at the time, if you didn't break a law, if you were okay in Nelson County, and Jesse never did anything in Nelson County, nobody in Nelson County needed to arrest him.
Yeah.
And he was smart enough not to do anything that way. But somebody, at that time, the sheriff or the city marshal wouldn't arrest you unless you had done something local. But that's what these detectives were doing. They were taking up the charge, and they were going to find these criminals that may have killed somebody or robbed somebody and all. And there's a real interesting book that great-grandson of George Hunter wrote. It's all of his career, and he didn't die till like 1915 or something.
Yeah.
And he tells about the different people and how he found them and the kind of fights they had and and all that. We have our own little Western stories here. Our little the high noon stories here in Kentucky. And George Hunter was right in the middle of them. And he lived here in Bardstown. He raised children here. He ended up moving to Louisville and became a detective for the L&N.
Well, Nelson County, we go back to the formation of Nelson County, and that was when they did start dividing it up. At Bardstown, I guess, was it the county seat from day one?
County seat, yes. It was the biggest town. Elizabethtown wasn't even there until the 1790s.
Yeah.
We had different areas that had been settled, but this was the county seat for the entire county. That's why we have so many of the early records here. Until 1792, all the court records that happened stayed here. Now, let me go back to court. We had what they call the Court of Quarter Sessions.
Yeah.
Now, you think of that, 4 sessions, 4 times a year. The judge would come, the lawyers got their cases all together, and they would meet in the old stone courthouse, which you had a beautiful stone courthouse right in the middle where the present 1890 courthouse is in the center of town. And the taverns were all full of people that were coming to court. They were full of people that were giving depositions. Everybody had to swear, and they gave their deposition. They wrote it down and used it at court. Well, the Court of Quarter Sessions dealt with things like divorce. We didn't have divorce in the 1780s, 90s. It'd be about 1820 before we truly had legal divorce. But you had land situations where somebody was inheriting land, if there was a controversy, anything that had to do with property, even slaves, the controversy went to the Court of Quarter Sessions.
Yeah.
Your criminal court could be the Court of Quarter Sessions, but it wasn't a chancery. Chancery meant property, even to the point of inherited property. The criminal court was for people who had broken the law, where they'd either shot somebody or robbed somebody, called them names that they wouldn't stand for. Sometimes you had the county court, which was a smaller court like we have today, the fiscal court we call it. They dealt with things like the land surveyors, and they called them road surveyors. They weren't for land surveying. They were surveyors of the roads, where you looked at the road, and you were in charge of making sure that the area of road between point A and point B was no potholes, that it was good drainage, that you could travel on it. And you were appointed by the county judge, and if you didn't do a good job, you were fined by the county judge. The thing was, you had the option of calling up every man on your area, along that road, to get out and help fix it.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, they paid a fine of $1.25.
When you talk about people going to jail, now was there any severe punishment? I mean, then firing squads to hangings and things like that?
We had hangings.
Now, where would that be taking place? At right in the square of town?
No, they wouldn't do that. The one hanging the last hanging I'm aware of took place behind Jiggler's Inn, in that courtyard area, or the enclosed area, they call it, the jail yard. That was 1794, I think. No, 1894, excuse me. I believe it's 94. I have to look that
What
up.
happened to the old courthouse? Just fall down, or they tore it down for the new one?
Down. They took it down for the new one. The new one was 1892.
Well, yeah.
And the fiscal court was really smart on that too, because they looked at the bids, the architect's drawings, and they really weren't pleased with the architect's drawings. But here we are. This was the contest, had been won and all. And but they said, when the stone courthouse is demolished, we want you to use the stones in the new one. And we're trying to save money.
Yeah.
They're foundation stones. These were hewn stones. So they did. In the basement of the courthouse that's in downtown Bardstown, were actually created in 1790s for the old courthouse. And 100 years later, they took them and used them in the new courthouse. And when I was mayor, when the Justice Center was built, and I had mentioned this to Dean Watts and Judge Watts, and I also mentioned it to the architects because we were using them for another project, that is there any way you can take stone out of the basement of the present courthouse and put it in the new Justice Center?
Yeah.
And they all looked at each other and said, well, yeah, I think we can. I said, well, that would mean the continuity from the 1790s up to now, that we're still using something that we respect our heritage. And it's just a big rock. But a big rock can tell you a lot if it's, if you got a story to go behind it, kind of thing on that.
Well, like I said, we've done a lot of very colorful history over the years with going from the 1700s, the 1800s, and
we'll come talk Civil War sometime.
Oh yeah, we definitely want to talk about the Civil War. But again, there's a lot of things that still last today that were back then that we still see today right here in downtown Bardstown, Nelson County.
We have almost 300 buildings listed on the National Register. Of those 300. More than 100 of them are pre-Civil War.
Now, the big, I guess, boom or bust, whatever you want to say, E-Town. I mean, you mentioned that come along a few years later. E-Town is a big, sprawling, almost a metropolis to some degree. Bardstown is not. What is the reason Bardstown didn't explode to become something like an E-Town?
Well, E-Town exploded because of Fort Knox. Camp Henry Knox was started in World War I. And that was a camp for training. So it started as early as that. And then the Second World War is when it really, enlarged. And it became a very important part of Hardin County's history. And then the next thing that happened to Hardin County, or Elizabethtown, is when they opened up the mall on the north side of the road, north side of town, on the way to Fort Knox and to Radcliffe and all. So they let their downtown get away from them, so to speak. Now that doesn't mean that was wrong or what. You just asked me what happened.
Yeah.
The other thing about why Bardstown stayed where we are, there's two reasons, and I hope nobody hits me over the head for one of them. But one of them is that we never had enough money to tear it all down and build it back. Now, if we had enough money, like they've done in other places, to go in and say, this is an old building, we're going to get rid of it. And there were many times in the last 200 plus years that the community wrote letters to the papers and stood up and said, don't tear this house down, or don't remove this and build this somewhere else. It's been over and over. I can go back and find at least 4 different places that there was concern in the community about what we were doing to what we call our physical heritage.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, people in this community would, if they couldn't afford the big house or the old house, they found somebody who could, that they didn't just remove it for the land. The other thing, we had room around us to expand. We weren't, the river, we haven't gotten to the river exactly.
Not yet.
Now that. And we always think about the boundary of Bardstown being the bluegrass and the beach fork, and then out toward Boston. I don't know where our boundary is there. But we're pretty compact, but all around the town we've had settlements and businesses. And the main thing that always made the difference in Bardstown are the roads. We were on the way to somewhere.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right.
On the way to somewhere. And we had good roads in late 1700s. We had those buffalo paths we talked about, but they went somewhere. And then later, the Civil War. One of the reasons we had the Civil War groups camping here, the training, was because of our turnpikes. They were built with stone. They had stone underneath them, and they were solid roads. They just weren't gravel over mud.
Well, that'll be one of our next episodes. We'll talk about the Civil War. Maybe move on into the 1900s, World War II. We've got a lot of World War I history as well here.
And I think people ought to know about their school systems.
Yeah, well, that's true. We haven't even touched on that.
Education, and that's another thing that Bardstown always had, Nelson County had, was a desire for their children to get a good education. And we can certainly make several stories about all
And
this.
we're probably going to.
Okay.
So we're going to stop right now because we can't stay here forever, but it's been fascinating. And again, I know you've got several books. Do you believe you said you had them on sale at
I have them at Artist Barrel, which
Artist
is
Barrel.
a artist co-op right across from Town and Country. There are some at Hearst Drug Store, and I always have some with me when I'm traveling around. So I'll be glad if you give me a call. I'll be glad to.
I know you say you got some traveling coming up here soon. It'll be just local area.
I'm hoping. Yes, we're supposed to go to Bloomfield on the 11th, I think it is, at the Bloomfield Library. We're going to have the Spirits of Wicklund Mansion, which is my newest book, and I'll probably take some of my others for the people who want to fill out their collection. I've actually written 15. 4 of them are out of print, so you can't buy 15 from me because I don't have them. But there's numerous ones that will fill in all of this different history we talk about.
All right, well, Dixie, appreciate you coming in today. Dixie Hibbs, historian here in Bardstown, Nelson County, and again, been part of history and relays history, so appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks a lot. We'll stick around. A lot more to come on Community Focus here on Channel 6. Community Focus saying so long. See you next time. Take care.